Thank you very much, Brandon, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone, and allow me to begin with a few words. And I'm really delighted to be today here with all of you at this important summit, the Design for Humanity, which brings together a good mix of stakeholders and partners from the academia and beyond, including a very fine and seasoned senior diplomat. Today we come together and we focus, as we look forward, on innovative approaches to transform the design of humanitarian interventions and to make them more relevant and effective in terms to responding the complex emergencies and crises that we face in our world today. The ambassador just mentioned some of them, Yemen, but there are many others. IOM is really delighted to have this partnership with Fordham University. The design for humanity summit is our first tangible outcome, and we work together with a view to fostering innovation. So this is one clear objective for us, but also making sure that as we do so, we also contribute to revitalizing partnership and making sure that at the end of the day, we have end result products that will make change on the ground. All this started with the MOU that we signed with Fordham University, particularly the Institute of International Humanitarian Affairs in 2016, which basically formalized our growing collaboration and also provided a framework for us to contribute to the broader goal of improving the delivery of humanitarian assistance, reducing aid dependency, and enhancing the prospect for recovery, which is important as the focus has always been not just on the prevention, but making sure when crises happen, humanitarian interventions take place, there is a quick and effective bridge and transition through recovery to normal development situation. I'm really pleased to recognize that there were many of my IOM colleagues who have been contributing to this work from our headquarters, our field missions, and some of them happen to be here today, and you are going to hear from them more during the day. On this part, let me also say that we are really committed to work closely with Fordham University, but particularly with IIHA towards making sure that we take this initiative forward, and in doing so that the Design for Humanity Summit will not be just a one-off event, and we will work to make it more of a permanent humanitarian and design lab where we could together research, test, and pilot some of the innovative humanitarian solutions that would be required more and more. My second point is to share with you some what I would call reflections. And the first reflection would be about humanity on the move and the challenges that are ahead. Recognizing that migration is an old phenomenon. People has been on the move since the earliest of times, and migration has always been used as a strategy for looking for greener pastures and new opportunities, but also a last resort survival strategy for people, unfortunately, fleeing situations of natural disasters and conflicts. And even today, that has not changed. And migration continued to be one of the frontier issues that are facing our world, given the trends that we see in the economy, in the environment, in human rights. Clearly, migration is with us today. It has become one of the mega dynamics of our time, and migration will continue to serve, talking about the positive side of it, as a catalyst for economic growth, as a major driver of population movements around the world, but also as a blender of civilizations and cultures. But there is also another side to migration, unfortunately. This is the less positive side, which is characterized by the humanitarian tragedies that we see in many parts of the world. And many of them involve migrants who, during the course of their journeys, they lose their lives, either by drowning in the bed of the sea, being buried in the Sahara desert, or lost somewhere. If we look at the data on that, it suggested that in 2017 there were 5,205 migrants who lost their lives during the course of their movement. And the data from 2014 suggests that the figure was 20,160 people who have been on the move, and they couldn't make it to greener pastures, and they ended up, unfortunately, in brown bags or lost somewhere. In total, we have more than 60,000 people who lost their lives during the migration journeys since the turn of the century, since 2000. So this is the migration tragedies that we need to be mindful of, and this is where we have a role for our conscience, but for our action also to start move and try to change that situation. The other troubling side to migration is represented by the incidence of human smuggling and human trafficking. This happens at border crossing points, it happens during the transit, it happens on arrival to destination countries. Pope Francis was eloquent in condemning human trafficking as a crime against humanity, an open wound that we can no longer afford not to deal with. Unfortunately, that situation continues despite the efforts by the international community. Human trafficking and smuggling is still with us and is still thriving in many parts of the world and causing not only pain, but violations of human rights and putting many migrants at risk and jeopardizing their lives. More action is needed, especially when it comes to prevention, to protection, to partnership, to persecution, and to making sure that people's dignity and rights will be respected. The other factor that we need to take into account is the record-breaking number of people that have been displaced globally. The ambassador mentioned the figure of 68 million people globally. This includes refugees and IDPs, and including asylum seekers. The figure that I would refer to was recorded in 2015, and it speaks about a total of 63 million.5, so her figure is more updated, and you can just look at that to see the details of that. The 63 million.5 includes 21.3 million refugees, 3.2 million asylum seekers, and 40.8 million IDPs. And it's important not to focus on the numbers. I think it's important and crucial that we cut deep and recognize the underlying vulnerabilities, the risks to life, and the deprivation of rights. And if I look at these are the issues that the Design for Humanity Summit need to focus on and to provide solutions that are not business as usual, that are innovative, and that would make the difference on the lives of the many people who are involved. Many of them happen to be women and children. Now, let me share with you my second reflection, which what I would call the game changer to the global discourse on migration that happened in the year 2015 with the arrival of more than 1 million into Europe, and it became clear that migration hotspots across the world have taken the shape of a perfect storm, extending from the Mediterranean to the Andaman Sea, to the Gulf of Aden, to the Himalaya, and many parts of the world, characterized by the massive size of the people on the move, by the mixed nature of the flows, so refugees, IDPs, asylum seekers, migrants, and many others, but the complexities that are involved. And I think the world at that point recognized that was a situation that cannot be just left as it was. There was a need for action. There is a need for a comprehensive approach to it, not a piecemeal. There is a need to change from firefighting approaches to more systematic ways of responding to challenges like that, recognizing A, that their human cost is unbearable because the deaths that are involved, the violations of rights that are there, and that impunity is not the way to go, and that the world need to be moved into action. The second push factor to action was the recognition that the irregularities of movements exacerbates the vulnerabilities of migrants. The more people move in irregular situations, the more that they are become vulnerable to abuse by human smugglers and traffickers. There is a need to find more regular pathways for migration. There is a need to find more orderly, peaceful ways for people to move. The third challenge around this is, and many of you would recognize that, is about the narrative that prevails today, especially when it comes to xenophobia, when it comes to discrimination, and the toxic language that's being used in describing migrants and in stigmatizing them. And it gets worse, at times of elections being politicized, and where we see public pronouncements that not represent what countries traditionally being used to stand for in terms of values and principles. Unfortunately, we see more and more of that today, and this is one thing that needs to change. Talking about all that, I think my third point would be the Born of Hope, which happened in 2016 with the adoption of the New York Declaration. This was a changing moment for migration because throughout, migration was dealt as a national sovereignty issue, and at best, it was for countries in the same region to work together on their migration issues on non-binding and non-committal basis. But the New York Declaration elevated the migration agenda to the top of the UN and other global forums, and it became very clear that the world is looking for solutions, is looking for comprehensive ways of working together, and is finally finding way to bring into the global framework what I would call the missing piece in migration, because we have the national, we have the regional, we never had the global piece. And now, thanks to the New York Declaration, that global piece missing for so long is finally falling into place. And here I would like maybe to emphasize 5 points. One is the recognition that the New York Declaration is not just simply a visionary outlook concerning large movements of refugees and migrants. It is more of a change and a shift that brings new ground for migration to be not only under the heavy lid of national sovereignty, but more open to collaborative approaches. And this is the really fundamental change. And the New York Declaration and what followed after that is driving us in that direction, where the world community is working together. And if it all goes well, we'll be having for the first time ever an agreed document by all the members of the United Nations that at least trying to regulate and make migration safe, orderly, and responsible. The second point is to recognize that the inclusion of migration-related targets and goals in the 2030 Development Agenda was a very important change. They were left out during the outgoing MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, if many of you would remember. So migrants, mobile population by and large were left out. But thanks to the SDGs, now we have a specific target, 10.7, that calls on member states to facilitate safe, orderly, and regular migration. The importance of that is not just that, it is for the first time migration that is no longer held hostage to what I call the security agenda, and it has now been included in the International Development Cooperation Framework, which the SDGs. That is very fundamental change. Following that, the third important thing is that the New York Declaration resulted in two compacts, one for refugees and one for migrants. I speak about the one for migrants, the Global Compact for Migration. The earlier one was about enhancing the responsibility sharing for refugees. The GCM, Global Compact for Migration, about something I think very important, not happened before, which is strengthening the global governance of migration and setting out the necessary principles, commitments, and understandings to work on migration and cooperate in all the dimensions of the migration work. I think we are getting there. We have one more round of negotiations that will take place next week from the 7th to the week after, from the 7th to the 13th of July. And if all goes well, we would, for the first time ever, be able to have a global compact, and that means we would not miss the historic opportunities that has been afforded to us by the New York Declaration to get this done. And hopefully, once it's done and is ready for implementation, then we will all commit ourselves to make that shift from negotiations to implementation, putting migrants on top of that agenda and ensuring that the commitments will be honored and implemented. The other point related to that is recognizing the purpose of this compact that has been eloquently outlined in the New York Declaration as a contribution to the global governance of migration and as a means to improve collaboration and coordination on migration, but also as a comprehensive framework to address migration in all its aspects: humanitarian, development, human rights, etc. And the New York Declaration also provided for IOM to join and enter the UN. The ambassador mentioned that before. And actually, with that, our work was also cut for us because it was recognized that IOM would need to contribute to assisting and protecting migrants more comprehensively, help member states to address their migration issues, but also improve the coherence between migration and other related policy domains. So that is what I call our work has already been done for us. This is the beginning, with more to come. And now if IOM is given the role to coordinate the work of the UN on migration and helping everyone in the UN system to get together and improve the partnership and the coherence between the different strands of the work, I think that the recognition of IOM role is not only be given justice to, but also there is a huge responsibility that would be put on our shoulder to be a better partner to everyone else. So that leads me to my final word to thank IIHA for this opportunity, and let me here restate IOM vision for migration to be well-governed and for migrants' rights to be respected and for the movements to be done not out of desperate necessity, but out of genuine choice. So this is the direction that we are taking, and on those words, we have a commitment to work with IIHA in order to not only just to innovate, to bring new ideas and new designs and new approaches to the way that humanitarian intervention are done. I think the importance of bridging the gap between the academia and the humanitarian community is absolutely at the top of this initiative. And this initiative is open for many others. We hear that the private sector is here and many other key players that needs to join us in order to make this heavy lifting possible. I thank you all, and I again echo IOM commitment to work with all of you. We heard this to be the beginning. I think there are many activities that are planned, and I think the ultimate goal is to make this not one-off, as I mentioned as I started, but to institute this initiative, and we have a permanent lab that would respond to the growing needs. I thank you all.